So as Glenn touched base with you on, to edit the cost center, you come to admin and cost center from the home screen, and you're presented with a window like this. I'm assuming you can see my iGyro.
Yes.
Yep. You probably won't see this drop down box, or if you will, it'll probably only have yours in there because you've only got access to your own database, whereas my user account for server sub purposes has access to each of them. So if we went down to, say, Southwest Sydney, you'll see here that you've got a cost center structure which is actually, I guess, inconsistent with that of the master list. Which means there's two things we can do about that. One, we can wipe it out and give you the new list as we did with the notifications the other day. Or I guess if you're planning on using a different cost center structure altogether, we'd then have to replicate that in Xero and BuildIQ, which would be, I guess, a much more monumental task.
I would rather prefer to go with your
Yep.
with the standard cost center structure.
Yep. All right. So we'll put this to the side, and I'll get Tim to wipe this out and to apply a brand new copy later today. And so we'll just jump back to the franchising list, which will be the way yours will end up looking. So down this left-hand screen here is the list of the cost centers and the associated mapped GL account. Now, the GL account is used for your accounting purposes, for your reports, and I guess itemizing what is cost of sales and what's cost of labor and all the rest of it. We took an approach about 2 or 3 years ago to do a separate GL account per cost center. Historical builders prior to that, and potentially lots and lots of builders out there, would be using a cost center structure where they might have, say, 50 cost centers all mapped to one GL code, and they might just say that's carpentry labor, and then this is, and they do grouping. While that's okay generally for an oversight, it then makes it quite challenging to narrow down specifically from your reporting where your overruns are. So in Xero, you can set up reports in any way, shape, or form, and you can group the GL codes yourself after the fact in your reports and say these 10 GL codes are carpentry. Or you can look further down at individual GL codes, which allows you to see individual cost center overruns. So we're strong advocates of the idea of having a GL code per cost center because it gives a lot better reporting down the track. The standard prefix is just putting the number 3 in front of the code. So 002 is 3002, and 625 is 3625, and so on and so forth. The first time you go to do a Xero synchronization, if you've already got these filled in, it'll verify that on a dialog Xero screen. And when we apply that to new databases, this is the standing offer or the standard thing that we copy into people's databases when they start afresh with us these days. So each cost center, you click on it, it will display to you in the middle screen here the items which are proposed to be attached. By attached, I mean digital links provided in the quote email or the purchase order email, and their friendly name. Now, many of these here won't have any attachments whatsoever because you're not asking for a quote request for franchise royalties and you're never sending a purchase order to us. So there's no rules set up around that cost center for either of those circumstances. However, if you came down to, say, 360, your carpenter frame labor, which is your standing of your frames, putting up your trusses, timber posts, the installation of windows, you'll see in here we're presented with type purchase order and type quote request and the friendly name associated with the file being attached. So cost center 360 is just a generic carpentry frame purchase order. It doesn't delineate between steel or timber. We use the same cost center, just different items. But if you look at the supply, we actually have 2 distinctly separate cost centers, one for supply of timber frames and one for supply of steel frames. Part of the reason is the quote templates. So each cost center can have a quote template associated with it, which is back here in quote templates. And if we come down here to say 320, you'll see here that, we talk about treated timber or untreated timber, the timber frame spacing, the material, what size and type the posts are. If we were using steel framing in the same cost center, this would get very, very messy because you you'd only be able to have a template for one or the other. So essentially, where it's likely we'll be sending different instructions or requesting different things, we've taken the approach of creating a separate cost center for that purpose. So 321, for example, which is your steel frame and truss, there's truss material, steel, truss spacing 1200, and it's a lot cleaner because we're doing the same thing always with our steel. We're pushing out the trusses as far as we can go. We're putting sealing battens at 450 centers to the underside so that we can use standard plasterboard and save some money. And it describes to them what they need to provide. Whereas
so this description, what you've got here, will go onto the PO?
No, this is the description that goes on the quote request email. So we issue the quote request from within Gyro in the quote request module. And when you choose that cost center and choose that supplier, this is the default text that will appear in the window for you to edit. Now, as you can see here, all this stuff in red is intended to be adjusted on a job-by-job basis or on a franchise-by-franchise basis. So we've set up one master template we can copy into everyone's database. And if, however, they're only ever doing metal roofing and they only care about, 40 mil steel battens, then they could just delete this section out here and just change it all to black. But it gives a nice broad general oversight that the franchisee can then look at and say, what am I going to be doing as standard, or am I going to be changing on a job-by-job basis? We've got some franchisees that only do their trusses at 900 centers, and they use, as you can see here, 16 mil Rondo furring channels fixed to resilient mounts. So they're not sealing battens, screwed off. They're the brackets that hang them down. And that's what they do always. We've got other builders that just do 600 trusses and batten as well. And then we've got some that do 600s and just do direct fix. So wherever it is likely that we will be sending out a different quote request to a trade or supplier, we've opted to have a different cost center so that we can set up these templates in those instances. As you can see here, there's one for steel roofing supply only. So this would be an email that would go to, say, Metrol if you wanted to buy the steel by itself, and it describes to them that they're supplying the material only. And then we've got one which is 391, which is in the instance of buying the steel and you're paying labor only. This is a labor only quote template. However, if you're using, say, Stoddart's or a company to supply and install, we've got cost center 392 for that scenario, which describes supply and install. So that's the quote templates, and that's why we've split timber and steel, and the same applies for the floor systems. So for 335, we've got your timber floor system, and 336, we've got your steel floor system. So we come back here to the cost centers. 360, because it doesn't matter to the carpenter. We're not asking the carpenter to quote anything. We're telling him what we're going to pay him based upon purchase orders. We didn't need to split that into two distinctly separate cost centers. We didn't need to create a timber frame and truss and a steel, carpenter. In the instance that you wanted to send a quote request to a carpenter, that it's set up to send the council plans, the engineering, and a copy of the carpentry edge for both steel and timber, so that if you're asking them for a steel quote, they've got the document to reference, and vice versa. And then when sending the purchase orders, which is obviously at a much later stage, we have these items here being both the carpentry edges for labor, copy of the engineering, no price orders for each of these cost centers. And by no price orders, I mean that our system automatically creates a copy of a purchase order without pricing every time we create a purchase order. So it creates two, one being the master file you would send to that trade, and a second one not having pricing, which is useful for sending to other trades or sending to suppliers. So the carpenter, for example, in this instance, if it was a timber frame and truss, he would get a copy of the frame and truss purchase order with the quote reference, the site address, all the particulars we've sent to the frame and truss, but without the price on it. Okay. And so it would also have the frame and truss phone number on it. So they'd be able to look at it and say, okay, this frame and truss is coming from Bunnings. Here's the quote reference. If they need to make inquiry about it or schedule it, they can. The same 340 is our tie down purchase order. Framing hardware, bolts, brackets. So that they would also get a copy of that. So when the purchase order is sent to them via email, they'll get all of these no price orders automatically attached that says the framing hardware is all coming from Bunnings. We're supplying 20 of these brackets and 40 of that and 17 of these bolts, and here's where they go, and here's the spacings. Essentially, whatever instructions I've put on the purchase order to the supplier, they're getting a copy of that instruction, but without the pricing. The same applies for the frame and truss. They're getting a copy of the window purchase order, for example, so they know where we're getting the windows from. When we place the order, it'll have the phone number on it, it'll have the quote reference, and so if they need to call up the window manufacturer to get a copy of the window schedule, they've got a copy of the purchase order without pricing it to do so. Now, these names here in the middle are what Tim has called friendly names. They're, I guess, how you would talk about them generally to people. It's, you know, it's the carpenter edge, or it's the window detail, or it's the plans in this format, so on and so forth. They're the friendly names. And the friendly names are then tied back to a filter name or a programming name or an actual file name, if that's how you'd like to refer to it. And so in this instance, if we come back here to 360, for example, you have plans construction. If we scroll down this list here, which is alphabetical, and look for plans construction, what that is doing is plans construction is the friendly name, and the filter, which is the search criteria that Gyro is using to find these files, it is looking for the word construction in a file format PDF in the drawings folder. So what it's doing is Gyro is saying, you know, generally, you know, Shane knows it as plans construction. That's what I'm going to display here as a friendly name to make it nice and easy for people to identify. But what Gyro is doing in the background is it is looking for a file with a file extension of PDF and the word construction somewhere in its name in the drawings folder on the job. Now, these percentages, I'm sure you're probably aware, but for those others who are watching the video, the percentage means anything. It's a coding function that pretty much means anything in this instance. So it's what this instance is saying is it's saying before the word construction, you can have anything there. I don't care. And after the word construction, you can have anything there. All it has to do to fit this criteria and for Gyro to think it is a construction set of plans is to have the word construction somewhere in its file name with the file extension PDF in the drawings folder. So if for example, we went to, I've got your job here, I believe, open in a different database. This one here, drawings. I could, in this instance here, it's ignoring for the council plans, which is looking for the word council. It's going to ignore all that. I could type in whatever mumbo jumbo I like. It doesn't matter. It's going to flat out ignore it. And I could put whatever mumbo jumbo here at the end I like. And it doesn't matter because all it's looking for is the word council followed by .pdf at the end. So the reason the programming is written in that manner is it means if you've got a construction amendment, for example, and it's the only file in the drawings folder, it will find it and it will associate that as the construction drawings. The same goes for council. If it's council amendment 1, council amendment 2, council amendment 3, it will find that file because it's got the word council in it. And it will then be attached to a quotation or for purchase order placement. The downside to that, or the reciprocal, is that if you're not diligent in maintaining your database, as in moving files from the current working folder to the old folder, if you leave the old set of plans in there and then put the new set of plans in there beside each other and they're both called council, your trades and your suppliers will be sent both versions because technically both files are sitting in the drawings folder and both meet the naming convention. So it's very, very important that when you're working, bear with me a moment, sorry, quote, cost centers. When you're working in your jobs, when the moment a new file becomes available, you put it in the main folder and then you move the old one to the old folder. That way there's no instances where you're going to have two file names in the same folder meeting the same search criteria, and you won't end up with a situation where you're sending both plans to a trade or supplier and confusing them. So that's how the screen generally works. It's friendly name, what it's being attached to in the middle, which is, in this instance, it's engineering, and it's being sent with the quote request, and it's engineering, and it's also being sent with the purchase order. And then down the right-hand side, we have the friendly name and what that matches to as an actual search criteria. Another example would be these no price orders. So for example, it's looking for something before 735, and then anything between 735 and no price. And if something is sitting in the supervisor's folder in purchase orders, matching that convention, then that will be attached to the purchase order. Now, creating a new one is as simple as pressing the plus symbol, typing in your friendly name, typing in what your filter is or your search criteria, which might be an exact file name. If you've got a file that's always named exactly the same way, and it's sitting in Global Docs, for example, because you can also map to Global Docs, then you can attach that file as is in every instance. An example being the robe details. In the details tab in Global Docs, we have a file called robe space details.pdf, and that's set up as a filter, which is presumably going to, I'd say, maybe a finishing carpenter, for example, or something such as that. Fit out detail, lift off hinges. The risk with changing these is while we're doing a training session here and obviously educating you and others who watch this video down the track, if you decide to use a differing naming convention, generally you don't like how we name things, if you don't think it's logical or whatever the case is, think it's too challenging, I don't know. If you go changing these, if you then use Service Hub for services, it's going to be very, very hard for us to make an exception to the rule for you generally, because the estimators will be doing the same naming convention for 15 different builders, and are just not even going to think of going, oh, this is Chris's database, I better change it to this because Chris wants it named like that. That it's just not going to happen. And then the files won't match when quote requests go to be sent, and things won't be sent, and the same will apply to purchase orders.
Okay, so I understand that just back to the folder and the tick global at the bottom and the group integrity. So I understand where you sort of pick up the file for construction.
Yep.
What is maybe I've already covered that, but can we just go through again on that folder with the tick global and the group?
So the group there is showing integrity franchising because these rules belong to integrity franchising. So this is our cost center master that we copy to people. In your database, that's largely doesn't matter. Group share is a programming function that's higher up. Ticking the box global will change the window that you're presented for choosing your file. So what it's going to be doing initially, if you press plus and create a new one, if I click here on these three dots, it prompts me here asking me to choose a folder that exists as the standing folder structure for attachments in a job. And so it's saying, is it going to be attached in maintenance? Is the file going to be found in the engineering Dropbox? Is it going to be found in the geotech Dropbox? Where am I looking for this rule that you're creating? So for example, if you had if you had a specific detail, or you had something else that you wanted, your own site safety rules or something like that you wanted to communicate to people, being things that are specific to you, or you wanted to attach a copy of your trade contractor agreement, something that's not going to change and something you don't want to store on every single job, you would tick this little box here for global, and now what it's going to do is it's going to present us with the Global Docs folder structure in a moment when it loads.
Okay, so that is where you, for instance, pick up the Integrity Edge or
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the Integrity Edge is stored in Global Docs, and so we tick that, and we're saying, look in the Integrity New Homes Global Docs, look in construction, look in Integrity Edge, and inside that folder, you'll find whatever search criteria I've told you. If, however, you had your own Integrity Edge, or you had your own specific site rules, or you wanted to, as a matter of course, issue a trade contractor agreement to all your trades, even those who have already done work for you, just as a standing item that went out on every single purchase order, you could upload a copy of that to your individual Global Docs, which I'm not an employee of yours, so I can't see your folder, but it'd say Southwest Sydney, you'd press plus, you'd come to construction, you'd choose the folder, you press OK, and then you'd come in here and you'd go, trade contractor agreement, and you might go percentage trade underscore contractor underscore agreement .pdf if that's how you're naming it, or you just might be typing in, contractor percentage. Where's percentage gone? 5. Contractor percentage agreement, and it's going to look for anything before contractor, anything between contractor and agreement, and as long as it finishes in a PDF, it would then attach that file. That would be then creating a rule. So if I came here, for example, and I've got global docs ticked, so it's going to prompt me for a folder, come here and say construction, just maybe the main folder, assuming it's stored in there, or I think it's actually stored in one of these subcontractors, for example. If I press save, I've now created a rule, and its friendly name is trade contractor agreement. It's searching for contractor agreement.pdf in this folder. And now to add it to individual cost centers, which you would have to do for each one, you'd look for all your trade cost centers, being such as 360 for your carpenter frame labor. Either choose purchase order or quote request, and press your green arrow.
Yeah.
And now we've just created the rule that says every time you're sending out the carpenter frame order, also attach as a link the trade contractor agreement, which it will find in this folder.
Okay.
To get rid of the rule, if you don't want to be attaching that file, or potentially if you're creating your own rules, like you go and create your own site safety rules and you don't want to use our one, then you could either rename the existing rule that's there and remap its folder, or you could create a new one called Site Safety Rules in brackets Chris, and then to get rid of our ones, you'd press the remove button. And it just takes it out of the working location. I'm just going to go and delete this rule we just created because it doesn't exist, and press save. So for example, your win reports, it's looking for the Geotech Dropbox folder in a particular job, and it's looking for wind underscore classification underscore report, followed by a date, anything after that, full stop PDF. So it's only going to attach a file if it's PDF. Most of these will finish in PDF, excluding the DWGs. So when we're ordering engineering and things like that, or when we're sending the purchase orders to the frame and truss, if we, for example, have created the plans in DWG, we find it's quite helpful for them when they're doing their detailing. So if it exists in the DWGs folder, which is a nested folder under drawings, and it's sitting in there with the name DWG something.zip, it will attach it and send that to the frame and truss.
Okay. Good.
So that's the use of this screen. As I said, if you want to add things, that's great. Certainly if you've got specific things you want to be sending to all your trades and vice versa, as I said, like with the trade contractor agreement, create the rules, map the location, come in, add it to your quote request or your purchase order or whatever your intention is. But if you can avoid unnecessarily changing the rules that are there historically, it's going to make doing Service Hub work for you a lot easier, because if you decide you don't like the word council, for example, for your plans, a lot of people have to remember that. When you go to send purchase orders or quote requests, which I'll just come into your database here and come to the quote request screen, when you choose the cost center, it will display on the right hand side here the items it's intending to send along with that quote request. And it does that as a link, not a PDF, so we get around maximum file size issues. Pardon me. If there is rules that are set up to send files and it can't find a file, it will display a little red exclamation mark over here on the left hand side, and when you put your mouse over it, it will tell you what is actually missing. And it'll say, we're trying to find this file and we can't find it. Now, sometimes the file doesn't exist. It's not intended to exist, and you can just completely disregard it. Other times it's a prompt to go back and have a look at your file name conventions in your job and make sure that you haven't inadvertently named something incorrectly. And then you press save, come back, and then it goes, oh, I found that file now, and it'll appear in the right-hand side. So we had we had this exact issue with sending quote requests on this job because you'd had construction plans done probably prematurely, like before the job had gone into council. So we break our jobs up into distinctly design rounds, contract, council, and then after council is approved and we've got our full scope of works and all of our quotes back, we then detail it for construction. So the intention is council plans go for quotes, construction goes for production. And because you'd already had the construction plans done before quotes were issued, none of these worked. I actually had to go in and just rename the plans to council so that Gyro could find these plans and send them to suppliers.
Okay.
So if, for example, I renamed this back to construction and come back here to the quote request screen, you'll see that these ones here that previously were going to be attaching the plans, it can't find council anymore. Come back here and rename it to council. And now it'll attach the plans. It does the same thing on the purchase order screen when you're choosing your purchase orders. Now we're not seeing anything here currently because this job doesn't yet have purchase orders. But if it did, along this screen here, you would see the cost center name, the purchase order, yada, 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 where it's being sent to. And if you click on it, it'll display here on the right-hand side what files it's intending to attach. And if it can't find a file, there'll be a red exclamation mark there explaining what it can't find. Now, ordinarily, the first, say, 10 or 15, maybe even 30 purchase orders will have a red exclamation mark there, and that's intentional. And that is because what I didn't describe a moment ago is we have kind of an interim step sometimes between council and construction known as site establishment. If there's a particular reason, which is obviously not advocated for from an estimator's perspective, but if there is a particular instance where a job has to start, the client's got finance, it's about to expire, or you've made commitments to them about a start date or whatever the case is, and you have to start this job and you don't yet have final everything, what we would do is we would release an interim set of plans between council and construction called site establishment. And those purchase orders will be just enough that you can start the job. It'll have your final pier layout. We'll have checked the windows. We'll have done probably a third of the construction checklist. And it'll be a set that you would issue to your initial trades and suppliers to make a start. It'll have your plumbing layout, for example. So you can send it to your plumber and he can make a start. It'll have your slab layout finalized. It'll have, things like that, standard construction on it, but it won't be, production ready. It might not have the final colors. It might not have the final bath or whatever the case is. So we come down here to plans.
So just to come back to the council and construction.
Yep.
So for quote purposes, you do need a file that says council?
Correct, yes.
So if I have construction drawings, I can duplicate that in my drawing folder and call the one council and the other one construction, and I don't have to go into the individual ones and change it.
Correct. 100%. You can just duplicate the file, or you can just rename it as the job progresses. Generally, I guess part of the reason we break it into two is that calling something construction before estimation is actually complete is very, very risky. Because an estimator's job is to check the plans and identify the things that are wrong. An estimator's job is to send out the quote request, review the addendum A, make sure all the details and the notes are correct, make sure your details are on your plans, review the entire thing, organize engineering, check that the engineering matches the plans, that the plans match the engineering. And a set of plans, once it goes into council and then comes back out of council, could potentially go through 4 to 6 amendments in that time. Changing notes, adding bushfire notes, adding extra sections. There's a lot of development that goes between those two stages. And we're very, very meticulous or particular about retaining the word construction for what we think is going to be the absolute final set of plans. There should be no discernible reason why these plans change in any way, shape or form once they're called construction. And that way our trades can readily rely on the fact that when they're given a construction set of plans, 99% of the time, that's what they're going to be building off, and that we're not going to see change. Producing a set of plans and calling it construction with a note on it saying this is assumed and that's assumed and this is assumed and calling it construction and then putting a set down in the garage, all those kinds of things can wreak havoc with your trades and suppliers, because you've given them a set of plans called construction. They potentially might start detailing off that, assuming it's production ready, and it's not. It's effectively concept.
Mm.
Yes, we most certainly can.
Thanks.